Hi, good morning, everybody. So welcome to the Breaking Barriers to Equitable Education Access, the Role of Opening Learning vCIES presentation. So here's some stats. I think we all know a lot about them, but 600+ million children and adolescents are not achieving minimum proficiency levels in reading and mathematics. According to UNESCO, this signals a learning crisis, which threatens the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. This is in part due to the fact that 40% of young learners cannot access an education in a language they understand, either because they're not available in the schools or communities, or because books simply do not exist in those languages. And this is exemplified by 97% of the households in Africa not having 2 or more books in their homes. In order to help combat this lack of materials, the Global Book Alliance was founded by a number of partners working in the education sector who recognize books to be an essential and frequently missing or under-resourced component in education efforts globally. As you can see there, there's a range of partners in this, including the large donor organizations, the multilaterals, as well as other organizations. The Global Book Alliance has set up to promote and support innovations, examine best practices and policies that change the way that books are created, procured and provided, so that all children have access to high quality books at the right reading level in languages they can understand and use, as well as support needed them to develop reading skills. And here we're referring to both physical books as well as online materials. USAID funds the Secretariat of the GBA, as well as the USAID Global Book Alliance in Action project, which I'm currently working on. Within the GBA, GBA focuses on open licensing as one of its core sectors. It was part of the aiming to provide wide materials across all different languages, particularly underserved languages. And as such, opening licenses materials is one of the key factors. The Global Digital Library is a flagship initiative of the Global Book Alliance. It was funded by Norway and is rapidly increasing the availability of opening license materials in 45 languages. The titles are available under the CC BY license, meaning that they can be translated or adapted with no restrictions, can be printed by parents, NGOs, ministries, as well as for the for-profit publishing sector, with InDesign files being available on GitHub. The GDL also works with a variety of other partners. You can see a photo there of the Google Bolo app, which is helping learners to learn using AI voice support. There's also aiming to help learners with disabilities. So they have sign language materials on there, as well as testing books for blind students. A further example of open licensing, as well as a collaboration, is the current book sprint, which is going on. Volunteers are able to translate existing materials into a wide range of languages via the GDL, as well as other platforms, including the Pratham Books Storyweaver, Asia Foundation's Let's Read, and African Storybook. So I encourage you all to go to translatorstory.org and to share that with your networks. So that's a very, very brief overview of some of the things that the GBA is doing to support open licensing, opening doors for translation and adaptation of materials to reach wider audiences, materials that can be contextualized based on need and updated over time at lower expense. That said, open licenses are often viewed as a threat by the publishing sector, who generally make their profits through royalties in the continued sale of their materials. However, digital disruption is happening, and publishers and other book supply chain stakeholders need to grapple with the challenges that digitization presents. Solutions could include online for free and printing for a fee, such as Storyweaver, volunteerism, such as Room to Read uses, content as a service, value-added services, or even advertising. So there's still a lot to be learned about the use of open licensing, but these policies and practices have the potential to significantly impact levels of access to reading materials. And this is what our presentations today are going to be about. We're going to hear some of these different options from our 3 panelists. So as Amber says, before we start, we are taking questions, Q&A in the question box at the bottom, so please type those in. We'll be answering some of the questions after the separate individual presentations, as well as having further discussion after the presentation and after Amber's discussion. So we're going to start with Kyle. Kyle is the Associate Director of Asia Foundation's Book for Asia's program and leads their Let's Read initiative. Kyle has been working in education and international development for more than a decade, designing, managing, and implementing projects as well as teaching throughout Asia. Let's Read draws upon the Asia Foundation's deep connections to partners and communities in 15 countries and across more than 30 languages to increase diversity in publishing, overcome book scarcity, and advance reading. Kyle will present on Let's Read Asia, an open source model that works for children, creators, and publishers. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you, Simon. Try to pull up the. Great, thanks, Simon. As Simon mentioned, my name is Kyle Barker. I'm the Associate Director of the Asia Foundation's Books for Asia program, and I lead our Let's Read initiative. I'm excited to be part of this presentation group today. It goes without saying, and Simon already mentioned this, but it's always worth mentioning that we all want to see more children reading throughout the world. And to do that, we need more books for children to read, and we need to be able to support the systems that create those books. Books that are in their own languages, the languages they speak at home in their homes, more books that have characters and settings and themes that they're familiar with, and more books that are at the correct level for wherever those children are at in their own personal reading journey. So I'm happy to share how we at Let's Read think about this challenge, and excited to hear more about how this group and others think about this challenge as well. To start off with, I'll share how we frame this challenge, and we think of it in terms of a book ecosystem. In order to sustain a robust culture of reading and learning, it requires a balanced ecosystem. This is a simplified way of thinking of this, but we have readers, creators, and distributors. So even though our ultimate goal lies in sustaining the culture of reading, to do so, we really need that balanced support from all three of these components. And if we put too much emphasis on one part of this component, the gains that we receive, that we get in that component, won't be supported and sustained by the other pieces unless we also work on those other pieces together and bring all three of these components and the entire ecosystem up together. So as I go through the presentation today, I'd like each of you to think about your own experiences and the programs that you're working on. And how your work might fit into this framework of thinking about the book ecosystem, and how you can support these other different aspects of the ecosystem. And I'd love to hear if there are different approaches and the way that you think about this challenge, and the way that you think about all these different pieces fitting together. So in reality, the ecosystem is far more complicated than just those three components. There's lots of different actors, individuals, and organizations within this ecosystem. And they each have their own needs and priorities and motivations. And as we're thinking about how to best support the entire ecosystem, we need to really be able to understand those different needs and motivations. So how do we support this entire ecosystem? Open licenses is one way to do this. And Creative Commons is one of the most common open license, and that's what we use with Let's Read. So as an example of this, Gove book was a book written by the psychologist Manuela Molina in Colombia recently. And this is a wonderful book that engages families and children to start talking about the coronavirus and the emotions involved with that. This book, Gove book, is available in 25 languages on her website. So Let's Read, we engaged our translation communities throughout Asia, and over a 2-week period, we translated the book into an additional 22 languages, and many of those languages were smaller ethnic languages. So we were able, with the Creative Commons and open license, to very efficiently and effectively get high quality material like this book translated and available through the digital library to those families and children. Over the last 5 weeks, this has been an incredibly popular, the most popular book in our library. It's been accessed in over 100 different countries and been read over 50,000 times. So this is a huge success story for Creative Commons and a great example of what we can do with open licenses. However, looking back on this framework of an ecosystem, this example really looked at the reader side, but we didn't really touch much on the creator side and certainly not on the distributor side. So then the question is, how can open licenses also support the creators and distributors? So for us, we look at the publishers as key to creating these sustainable ecosystems. Let's Read has programs in 15 countries across Asia, and often we see the publishers are thought of as playing only the role of the distributor, when in reality, we think that publishers need to play a greater role across all three of these components. They certainly work with the distributors, with print houses and bookstores and markets to get the books out, but they can also play increasingly more of that traditional role of bringing editors and authors and illustrators together to create books, to create that spur that creativity process, and then also do a lot more on the outreach side, reaching and connecting directly with families to promote reading, with community organizations and schools. So we see publishers as a way to bring all three of these sectors together rather than keeping them just siloed in that distributors segment. And we don't want publishers to be gatekeepers and the only ones to create books. It would be wonderful to have these different models, as Simon said, where creators can connect directly with families through digital platforms or other means, but publishers are going to be able to really create that foundation for that sustainable book ecosystem and that market approach to a sustainable book ecosystem going forward. Do you think it's worth noting that there is a publisher's continuum? Not all publishers are the same, and they don't all have the same needs. In some contexts, the publishers are basically print houses. They just are able to get books, print them, and then sell them into market. In other contexts, they license books from outside the country, translate them, and then print them and sell them. Whereas we're trying to help support and move publishers to that other side, where the publishers are really the ones bringing the networks together of the creatives to spur that industry of creating wonderful, locally relevant children's storybooks and bringing all three of those components together. So ideally, as we think of this book ecosystem, we also bring in that context of not all publishers are the same, and it really depends on what their needs are and what the capacity of the publisher and also the market is of wherever they are working. So how is this possible? How is it possible to use open licenses to support publishers and that entire ecosystem? One way is through a combination of using the design files and selective use of the Creative Commons attribution and non-commercial licenses. Just real briefly, the design files are the high resolution. These are usually extremely large files that are made when illustrators create children's storybooks. Not all design files are huge. Simple line drawings don't have to be that large. But as the illustrations get more complex and layered and nuanced, these files can be very large, and they have a higher resolution for the higher quality printing. Simon briefly went over the attribution Creative Commons license, and then also the non-commercial Creative Commons license. And this is a license that we use quite a bit. It's the same as the attribution license, but it restricts it for non-commercial purposes. So people can still read books, download them, share them, change them. They just can't do so for commercial purposes. In our Let's Read digital library, we use a combination of these two licenses and a few others. So anybody can read books, they can download them, they can share them, and they can print them out if they have access to a printer. And when you print books from the digital library, you get a great copy for personal use, and the PDF that's downloaded is a smaller version of these original design files. But again, in order to get that bookstore quality print, something that can be printed in large format and be bound and is going to be able to withstand that heavy use in classrooms and libraries, over time, you really need those original high resolution design files. And that's kind of the key to be able to keep control of those. And so for us at Let's Read, a lot of the books that we create in all the different countries, we apply a non-commercial open license to the books, so anybody has access to them on the digital library. And then we work with local publishers to provide separate exclusive commercial license to them, so they are the only ones that can sell those books in a given geographical area and over a given time. And in doing so, then we provide those design files to those publishers, so they're able to create those bookstore, really high quality types of books. Is this possible and is it sustainable? We think the answer is yes. One example of this using the design files is a project that World Vision had in Kalimpong, northern India. World Vision, this group in northern India speaks Nepali language, and they needed print books for their program. Pratham Books has an incredible collection of storybooks that are relevant, that are culturally relevant to this community and this family, but they don't have them in Nepali. The Let's Read digital library, we have these books in our library because Pratham has an open license on these books, and our translation communities in Nepal had already translated these into Nepali. But even if we wanted to, and World Vision approached us, we wouldn't have been able to print these books for World Vision in the Nepali language because we only have the digital EPUB version of these files. We didn't have the original design files. So instead, all three organizations worked together. We provided the translations to Pratham Books. Pratham Books entered those translations into the design files, and they printed them, and then they sent them to World Vision for implementation in the program. We ended up doing this with around 33 titles, and over 9,000 books were printed. Another example is we recently had a publisher roundtable in Cambodia. And Cambodia is a country where most of the publishers fall right in the middle of that continuum. They're doing more than just printing, but they sometimes struggle with outreach. And the two biggest pieces of feedback that we received from these publishers was their inability to consistently create popular books that would sell, and then the risk of printers or bookstores or other people in the market stealing the books and then selling them at a lower cost. And this, their fear was that they would lose their investment that they had in the print run. So by having the Creative Commons license, with a non-commercial Creative Commons license, this went a long way in alleviating those fears. Even though people are still able to print and download and sell them in the markets, having that non-commercial piece allowed the publishers in Cambodia to feel a little bit more secure that they would have then a separate exclusive commercial agreement with them. One more example, a couple more examples are we work with in Myanmar with a publisher called Third Story Project. And we worked with this publisher from the very start of the book creation process. So we created 15 children's storybooks working with local writers and illustrators. So Third Story Project had that experience of networking and bringing editors together in that process. We applied the non-commercial open license to these books, so they're all available on the Let's Read digital library to read for free, to download and share. But then we have an exclusive licensing agreement with Third Story Project to print and be able to sell those books in Myanmar for a given amount of time. Another advantage of having these separate exclusive licensing agreements is that we can write the authors and illustrators directly into the agreements. So we're not only supporting the publishers and the distributors with these separate licenses, but then we're also supporting the creators on an ongoing basis. So for each, the profit is being shared with the writers and illustrators, which is important for sustaining and building that creator side. And the last example here is in Nepal. We've done this for a couple of years, working with an organization called Srijanalaya and the publisher Safu. This year we created 6 children's storybooks within the Tharo ethnic language community. These are just incredibly beautiful books, well illustrated and wonderful stories. Again, they have the non-commercial open license, and then we have an exclusive licensing agreement with Safu to sell these books in Nepal. And this allows Safu to have larger print runs, which then decreases the per book cost, which lowers the overall cost that consumers, families in the market will pay for the books. But it also allows them to invest a little bit more in their outreach in the communities within Nepal. And again, the authors and illustrators are written into these agreements. So we're supporting the publishers, the distributors, and the creator side, along with getting these books out to the readers in the digital format and then also the physical format. So the few ending thoughts here are that publishers are a key component. We think about the children's storybook sector as an ecosystem, and we really need to be able to support all these different pieces at the same time and bring all of those sectors up and support all those sectors together. And publishers are a key component in being able to do that. It's not the only way, but they can be a foundation for supporting all of those different sectors. And not all publishers' needs are the same. In some contexts, some countries, some markets, they simply just print the books and are able to sell them in markets. In other countries, they need those exclusive agreements to feel comfortable with the risk of putting out and investing in their print runs. And so the last piece here is that open licenses can be used effectively to get the books out to children and families, and then also support those publishers. So thank you very much. I'm excited to hear the rest of the panel has to say and offer, and also hear from the audience of your experiences as well.
Excellent.
Thanks, Kyle. As we transition real quick, I'm just going to launch a quick poll so folks can respond to that. And then go ahead, Simon.
Excellent, thanks, Kyle. So while everybody fills in the poll there, our next presenter is Rebecca Chandler Leege. Rebecca is the Chief Impact Officer at Worldreader. Rebecca leads a global cross-functional team focused on transforming communities through digital reading. She oversees Worldreader's regional leadership, content, data, program, and business development units. Previously at Worldreader, Rebecca led World Vision's engagement in all children reading, a grand challenge for development, a global initiative of USAID, World Vision, and the Australian government. Rebecca will present on digital publishing models to support scalable book supply chains for education beyond the human.
How's our poll coming?
It's coming along. About half of participants have voted so far, so we'll give them a couple more seconds. You can start, and then let me know too, Rebecca, when you would like your poll. This was the sort of beginning Open Licensing 101 poll, and 201 is when you take it to the next level, and I can launch that when you want me to.
Why don't we go ahead and launch the first one, Amber, before I start? And
okay.
We'll do the other one.
The first one, yeah, the first one is launched. So there are 2 questions. Attendees are viewing the questions, and I don't know if the panelists can see them, so let me just double check on that. The first question is, are you familiar with open licenses? We have 14 respondents so far. And the second one was, which type of Creative Commons license have you used in your work? I will end it in just a second. Participants are still finding their polling window. There's also a couple questions in the Q&A. If we want to pause and take, panelists want to take a quick look at those and see if there are anything that we want to see if there's anything we want to answer right now. All right, I'm going to close the poll because we're at 85%, and that's close enough for me. And sharing the results. So we had 83% or 15 respondents say that they are familiar with open licenses. And then the most common seems to be CC BY or CC BY ND, which is just interesting. So, okay.
Yeah, great.
All right, go ahead, Rebecca. And then let me know, just give me a signal when you want your poll launched.
All right. Why don't you go ahead and launch the first one, Amber, before I start? Is that okay? Everyone, thank you for joining us today. The CIES virtual webinar has been quite interesting and informative, and I'm glad we can all be brought together around these topics that are so valuable for our work.
All right, your poll should be up now, Rebecca.
Great, thank you. And Amber, after the poll, can I be granted host or sharing so I can pull up my slides?
Yes,
Thanks.
sorry, I was multitasking in this
You're doing great.
new reality, so there you go.
Just taking a a look here. This is great. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. If you guys can hear any piano playing in the background, I believe it's my son doing his piano practice, but hopefully it will not be too distracting. Good to present. So the Asia Foundation, Kyle, thank you for that, all that translation of the book. Hello, my name is Coronavirus. Just this morning, I was looking on our platform to see how many times it had been opened, not even knowing you were going to put that forward. And we've had 12,592 openings of the book. So it's obviously very, very popular and meeting a need within the communities that we all serve. So thanks for all the hard work and translations and so forth. So building off of Kyle's great presentation and on this theme of how do we look at supporting the book supply chain, for many of you that may know or not know, Worldreader is a global digital reading organization. We've been supporting digital reading in the Global South for over 10 years now. And how we do it is we do it through partners. Partners are critical to who we are. And it hasn't always been the way that Worldreader has worked. We've done a lot over the last couple of years to retool, recognizing that we are a supportive instrument to many others who are on the ground doing the critical and field work that's needed. But what do? We offer digital reading expertise. We support on training. We work with partners on how do we integrate digital effectively into the type of educational programs that they are engaged in. Because we're reading, we support content, and I'll share a little bit more how we work with publishers. But we create collections, we're curators. So we look across both open and proprietary content and see how do we begin to bring together the most valuable collection for the reader at their specific age level, specific learning outcomes that are needed, and the desired engagement that we would love to see, particularly at a younger age, to create that joy of reading at the same time. And data comes wonderfully from technology, right? We can begin to measure, especially on education programs, begin to measure how much time is on task, how much time is actually spent reading. Are they reading at the right speeds? Are they just browsing, or are they actually stopping? Technology can tell that for us, and we use that very much to drive the impact that we hope to see. And finally, we offer our solutions on affordable technology, meaning that our solutions are not just designed for smartphone or tablet, but they're really designed for any data-enabled device. So we know that many communities are not, they may be connected, they may know what Facebook is, they may know WhatsApp, they may not know that they are actually fully data connected and could be using their phone as a learning resource. I believe COVID-19 has informed many of them of the use and the power of their phone that they have available to them. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about the type of collections. We do have a digital library of about 15,000 books. We have a number of categories, as you can see, 120 categories in which we obviously categorize and classify our content. But it's something that we've been building over many years, and we continue to curate based on the needs of our readers. Really relevant to this conversation is, can you guys, are you seeing the poll on my screen perhaps? Sorry, I'm seeing it, I'm trying to figure out how to.
No, we can't. And when you get a chance, I somehow gave you the entirety of the host capabilities instead of making you a co-host. So I need to be made a co-host again.
Oh, I wonder how I do that. Okay. 1 second, Amber. Let's see if I can figure this out in the middle. 1 moment.
If you hover over my name, I think you can make me a co-host again. I gave away too much.
There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, let me go back here. So we work with over 400 publishers around the globe, of which 187 of them are local publishers, meaning that they are from the regions in which we work. We work in South Asia, we work in the Middle East, East and West Africa, in Southern Africa, and then in Latin America. Many of you have known that we have, as Worldreader, chosen to do a multiple license model, meaning that we work both with open source content. So we're supporting and building off the poll information, building from taking content from readers such as Africa Storybooks, from the Global Digital Library, Storyweaver, etc. We also receive a lot of donated content from international publishers, Simon & Schuster, Penguin Random House, and others. But we also work closely with local publishers in order to pay them for their content. And we have created a variety of different licensing mechanisms with them, because we believe just as important it is to utilize open content to create and generate more content, we also feel it's important to financially support the creativity and the content that's being generated by local publishers to create that market, to further that market for them, and to demonstrate that reading actually can come, the content can come right from their local publishers and themselves. So here's just some samples of who we have in our, as our publishers. Talked a little bit about the paying the publishers already. I think that's really critical. Just to note, when we closed the first part of 2019 for us, we're in our fiscal year 2020, we had paid over $2 million to local publishers. And we feel that it's, as I mentioned, super important, preserving their local voice in the market, giving them the means to actually create more content and to be able to look at ways in which they can begin to sell their digital content effectively. And we have seen Longhorn Publishing, for example, has a whole digital unit now. Over these last 10 years, they've really grown. They're selling their ebooks, and others are coming along very quickly behind as well. So in building off of Kyle's presentation, one angle of training that we've really doubled down on is around metadata. So over the last, in 2019, we spent most of the year working with about 25 different publishers and training them on that metadata. And I'll explain that a little bit in the past. But part of our mission is, as Worldreader, is to support the local publishing ecosystem. We've done that through a variety of trainings, everything from what is an ebook to how do you digitize, how do you optimize your book on various platforms, how do you create quality children's books. And then this last year, we really focused on metadata, recognizing that a lot of the content that was being generated wasn't able to actually be found as easily and used as easily as we thought it should be. So some of the training objectives that we really looked at around there was, what is metadata? How do you use it? What's the value for you? We carried out a survey. We took their insights, and then we began to work with them as they drafted their own metadata policies within their respective publishing houses. So metadata, for some of you on the poll noted that you did not use it. I think it's really important for us to begin as really an industry to think of how do we, in our sharing of content, in our exploration and I would say exposure and trying to curate better content, metadata is really helpful. It's how we classify our books. And the deeper the metadata specs are for each book, the easier it is to find and the more accurate we can pull that book for the reader that is needed. So it's simply what we know. You know, it was kind of like looking at our old library systems in some of the global north. You really went into the very specifics of each title. And that is basically what metadata is, and super important as we move forward. I wanted to share a few examples of the results of our training and what has happened since we began that. If you look at this chart, you can see that most of the local publishers distributed their books via catalog. If you guys have read catalogs, it's really hard to go into understanding a lot of depth about the book. It's kind of an overview, a little blurb about it, some of the generic metadata, but could we offer a lot more so that people really knew what was inside that book, how to pull it out and how to put it into a specific collection for the readers that you needed. I should just also go back and say, give you a perspective of which publishers we trained. We trained in Ghana, Kenya, and Uganda, 18 different publishers across those 3 countries. And then we supported virtual training for another 13 throughout Rwanda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Malawi. This one, in terms of what did they see? They weren't even classifying. How did they use their data that they are going to do for use of the content? So I think this is really interesting. Where we were required to categorize the readers into age groups as a company, we had not done so. But after this exercise, we are now well organized in our book grouping. Just as basic of, does this book apply to a 3 to 5-year-old? Does this book apply to a 12-year-old? Having that specification already up front is incredibly meaningful to anyone who wants to use that type of content. The second one, exposure of our content. They didn't actually realize that the crisper the information that is created around each title, the easier it is for exposure and the more likely it is to be picked up and utilized. I think intuitively we know this, but we haven't actually built in a lot of these practices within our publishing mechanisms in order that we can bring content to life and be utilized more broadly. So what are the early results that we found? In actually acquiring titles from publishers, we nearly reduced it by 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks of time. Their metadata gets uploaded into our system. It saves a lot of time for us to be able to catalog our books. There was obviously great interest. I think what's interesting is Longhorn, Mountain View, and Book Talk, the Book Talk Alive, the World Alive, Book Talk Africa, which has been renamed from World Alive. They've now actually hired full-time staff to do metadata work on their books, because they recognize the value that it is offering and obviously the uptake of their content, both from a digital perspective as well as just from a sharing around their catalogs, etc. As I close, I wanted just to highlight how useful this metadata has been for us as we've put it into our system. All of us have some form of COVID-19 response. We launched our response on March 22nd, just over a month ago. And 2 platforms we have one designed for children or parents actually reading to their children or older children reading to themselves called BookSmart. And then we have a Worldreader app that's been around for quite some time. But the ability of having that metadata allowed us to quickly curate an open collection, which we've done with many of the great books that have been offered from Africa Storybooks and others, as well as then be able to track how many readers have we received across our platforms and how many books have been distributed. So we've reached 124,000 readers in the last month. We've distributed 458,000 books. And it was in large part really because we could easily pull those collections together. The publishers had worked really hard on some of the metadata in the past as we were building our curation collections, but really excited and pleased to see that the system is rounding out, and metadata is a critical piece of the book chain and the book ecosystem. So with that, I'll close. Thank you very much.
Rebecca, do you want to talk about the poll results real quick?
Sure, I will. Let me stop sharing and see if I can see those poll results again. There we go. So many of you, it looks like you're not, unfamiliar with meta tagging standards. The one that Worldreader has chosen to use is called Thema. It's the latest one. It's actually a global standard that's come into place, really trying to take into account a few factors. One, that it's multicultural, multilingual, and that it's quite flexible to recognize the different needs in different markets. And it builds off these other ones, the Onyx Thema scheme, as well as the vCIES. I would encourage you to, Google these and look these up and consider using them. We are finding more and more publishers really adopting the Thema scheme because it's able to be shared across geographies. And that's something I would say encourage us to all consider. The second question was, when you're searching for a book, what are your preferred mechanisms for finding the content that you need? And database, right? We're looking for the author and subject. And even more so, the more that we have that, 83% of us say that, we're probably pretty used to searching. But imagine in a world where we don't have all of that metadata available, it makes it harder to find the books. So the more that we can describe through a schema, and we use Thema within Worldreader, the more advantageous it will be. Any other questions around that? Maybe there's a question.
Yeah, there was one specific one, I think, for you in the Q&A, which is, what's the basis for the 12,500 hits on the book, meaning it's popular? You could unpack that a little bit.
Sure. So we do keep track of how many books have been opened and how many books have been read. We differentiate between those two. So right now I can say that the 12,500 are books that have been opened, that they've actually opened that book. Hello, my name is Coronavirus. I don't know off the top of my head, but I could let you know how many have actually completed that book and read it through its entirety. And your question is, what's the percentage of popular readers, potential readers? Great question. 12,000 hits out of the book, and that is available to roughly 80,000 readers right now. So if that gives, I can't quite do the math, but maybe Joe, you can do that quickly for me to give you a sense of how often that book has come up and been quite popular. We have over 80,000 users that have come into our platform in the last month. We know of those, about 17,000 have actually gone in and begun reading from a conversion rate that's pretty strong for any app usage for those that follow those statistics.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rebecca. So now we're going to move on to Maria Jose. Maria Jose is the Education Management Specialist at Lifelong Learning Project. She has worked in education in Guatemala for more than 10 years. Her experience includes educational research, technical advice on quantitative and qualitative monitoring and evaluation data analysis, strategic communication, project planning, management of educational programs and interventions. Maria Jose is talking about open licensing as a mechanism for enhancing educational resource development strategy. Over to you, Maria Jose.
Let me try and unmute you.
There it is.
Perfect.
Good morning.
There you are.
You see my presentation now, right?
Yes, you're all set.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, good morning. And in this time when we are rethinking access to education and ways of teaching and learning, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to participate in this virtual panel with these excellent colleagues and learn from their experience too. In a summarized way, I am going to share with you the adoption of open licensing under Lifelong Learning Project from USA as a key action for the development of a literacy teaching and learning resources strategy in early grades. So I will explain you who we are, which is our implementation context, and the open educational resources strategy we use. And I will share also some examples of how open licensing has been a mechanism for enhancing access and availability and the lessons that we learn from our experience. So, Guatemala is significantly ethnical and culturally diverse. The estimations indicate that 41 to 60% of the population is indigenous. Cultural diversity reflects in 25 spoken languages, and at the same time, we have one of the world's highest indices of income inequality and various barriers that limit the progress of women, indigenous people, youth, and minorities. In the country, 76% of the population does not have income for a basic basket of goods and services, and this percentage increased to 90% in the indigenous population and rural population. The Western Highlands is the project intervention area, and this region has some of the highest poverty rates. Close to 68% of the population is below the poverty line, and approximately 30% live in extreme poverty. Between 52 and 97% of the Western Highlands population auto-identifies as indigenous, and the predominant linguistic communities are Quiché and Mam. Guatemala also faces educational challenges, and national educational assessment results show that only 4 out of 10 students in the last year of elementary school reached the expected achievement in reading, and approximately 3 out of 10 do it in the Western Highlands. Less than 25% of children who learn to speak a Mayan language, Xinca or Garifuna as their mother tongue, learn to write in their language. So the educational policy contemplates the improvement of the quality of education process to ensure that all people, especially vulnerable groups, have access to and are subject to significant and relevant education. In the last years, the Ministry of Education made efforts to reduce inequity in education as an increased number of teachers in rural schools, higher schooling rates, and action for the implementation of a bilingual educational model. However, significant limitations remain in terms of access, quality, and cultural adaptation in the equality education of indigenous people. With the aim to improving education quality and access for underserved population, specifically indigenous children, the Lifelong Learning Project from USAID provides technical assistance to advancing the quality and equity of students' reading outcomes. The project supports the Ministry of Education to implement a literacy model for bilingual and intercultural educational context from pre-primary to 3rd grade in the Western Highlands. It involves actors at national, regional, departmental, municipal, and school levels. The literacy model is based on research and experience with teachers and students of fellow programs, with strategies and materials that promote effective methodologies for learning and development of reading and writing in bilingual intercultural contexts. Among other key elements as educational human resource professional development, educational coaching, methodological guidelines for classroom based on standards, family and community participation. It is recognized the educational resource need. Students, teachers, and members of the education community must have access and use educational resources to promote reading and writing learning. These resources must be able in first and second languages, aligned to the national curriculum, looking at competencies and standards as a reference, with validation and endorsement processes that ensure their quality. Educational resources do not constitute the center of the literacy model, but are designed to make it visible in school and in the classroom, and facilitating its implementation and favoring its sustainability in different spheres. So, why open resources? Between 63% and 71% of Quiché and Mam children speak their Mayan language. However, the language domain levels vary. When they enter the school, the student may have Quiché or Mam as L1 or first language, Spanish as a first language or as a single language, or they be monolingual in Quiché or Mam. This variety represents a challenge for education in bilingual and intercultural classrooms, with implication in both methodology and resources. Research suggests that one element for successful reading instruction is access to books. This variable is crucial for students regardless of the amount of the quality of instructions. The study shows that skilled readers usually had easy access to books at home, public libraries, and schools. And students who report easy access to books also read more books, independent of the background characteristics. Access to text and materials may be limited by economic barriers, but also by linguistic barriers. In Guatemala, book printing for children that demand bilingual education face challenges of availability of resources, in other words, budgetary allocation. fiscal transparency, accountability, and public management efficiency. Other challenges are related to technical capacity, human resources, and the time taken by production, editing, validation, and publication processes of text and educational materials. According to reports from school principals, 96% receive educational resources from the Ministry of Education. However, only 6% receive text in Mayan language. Textbooks are not yet available for all indigenous languages, and the amount of reading material available in these languages is limited. There is no specific national policy oriented to the timely provision and proper use of quality textbooks and educational materials. On the other hand, change in public administration teams have affected the continuity of initiatives and efforts of work on educational projects. So what we do, the Lifelong Learning Project strategy for the development of educational resources is based on the experience of intervention at classroom levels and consider aspects of the reality of resources in Guatemala. Among them, they have weaknesses in terms of alignment with the national curriculum, the link with teacher training and pedagogical coaching. They are not always available in the language that the students or the teacher dominates. The resources face distribution challenges on time in the school year and do not always arrive in sufficient quality. And sometimes educational resources are stored and not used. Teachers do not necessarily know how to use the availability of text and materials in the classroom. The open educational strategy considers the different elements of the literacy model and has 3 key activities. The first one is the capacity strengthening of the educational human resource. Professional staff of the Bilingual Education Directorate and the Ministry of Education Departmental Directorates settle the text and educational materials committee. They are working for more than 3 years in the design, development, and validation of reading materials. And the Ministry of Education technical and professional staff of different directorates have received training in theory, evidence-based content on literacy, reading learning, and reading comprehension. Teaching practices for literacy and bilingual context are other key of the activity. The open educational resources were incorporated into in-service professional development programs. These were implemented in partnership with local universities. Finally, greater availability and more intensive use of textbooks in educational materials is a way to take and implement the national curriculum to the classroom and improve student learning. So, access to quality educational material and resources for bilingual context is crucial. This implies the availability of open educational resources and first and second languages based on literacy, pedagogy, and neuroscience rationals. Teachers and learners need access to high quality print and non-print literacy, instructional materials aligned with evidence-based instructional models and practices. The universal design approach is used also for inclusion and expansion of response possibilities to different educational needs and different audiences. Consider the open educational resource approach. The strategy implies activity in the development of resources, access and availability, and use and implementation. Access and availability goes beyond distribution, and the resources are available in many versions and have created common licenses. The strategy proposes and adopts Creative Commons licenses to minimize the barriers related to restrictive copyright and incompatible technologies. Creative Commons licenses facilitate that materials in any format have no cost access, and different actors and stakeholders can use it, adapt, or redistribute them as they need. They facilitate sharing with the Ministry of Education and other implementing organizations. I will now present some examples of how this type of open licensing is incorporated in the development of materials, and it has enhanced their reach and their use. Okay. As a guide and reference resource, this is a reference book. Sorry. And we developed this book as a reference and guide resource, and the license does not allow derivation because it's a guided material, but it allows redistribution, and this has facilitated the use and reprint of the book. The Ministry of Education has printed more than 10,000 copies to distribute with teachers, and it's also available in digital version and was adapted to a wiki platform, making it available for consultation on the national curriculum page. Another great example is reading materials. The project worked on the development of reading materials in the Bloom software. This software simplifies the process of developing new books, allowing local literacy teachers and other authors to create both original materials and local adaptation of other books. It is an alternative to the traditional book creation process, facilitating layout and formatting processes and allowing authors to focus on content generation. In this case, each of the authors, mostly teachers, was required to be willing to work with open licenses and make their resources available. The result, more than 3,040 books in the Bloom library in different language reading levels and in different national languages, and several of them are also multilingual. Copies have been printed for delivery to community libraries and are available in various digital versions formats for online consultation and download on mobile devices. Anthologies and big books are another example of how resources with careful design, development, and validation process can broaden their audience through open licenses. The open license has allowed them to be used in a collective newspaper reading sheets for early grades. It has facilitated interinstitutional and interagency collaboration, and other organizations have been able to adapt and use the materials. For example, Project Concern International adapt big books to Canjobal. The original big book is available in Mam, Quichua, Spanish, and now they print about 1,000 copies to distribute in schools in the region. Save the Children will use anthologies and big books in the Quichua area and benefit more than 2,000 schools. And as Kyle mentioned before, we give them the original and high quality archives so they can edit and use for print with quality also. And it was very easy because the three institutions believe in open resources and open licensing, so this facilitates the process. Part of the content of these resources has also been adapted to a digital application for Android devices, integrating text, audio, and images. So the quality of these materials permit that we can use text and other content from these resources and make audiobooks, audio tests, and use them in different formats and amplify the ways that people can have access to them, printed or digital versions. Well, I'm trying to say some of the lessons learned and challenges with this experience. And the model of the project considers a top-down and bottom-up approach and a systematic approach. And this is important because it's relevant that all your actors and the stakeholder knows the open licensing, what implies, and this facilitates the author disposition. You not only need the institutional disposition or the institutional position, but you also want the teachers and the different members of the educational community or that are involved in the process of developing and designing materials also have the openness to this type of licensing and knows what it means. And this is linked with the other lesson that is institutional and local capacity building. All the process of generating the sources and the adoption of Creative Commons licenses has conducted to capacity building in order to strengthen the open educational resources ecosystems needed for sustainability. That means we have worked in stakeholders' involvement in the design of the resources and how this can be institutionalized, and finally how these resources are implemented and used. That is the final goal of the materials. And a relevant example of this adoption is the strategic consolidation of the regional textbooks and educational materials committee that participates in an editorial process and have generated several open educational resources. And we see the evolution of the team from the beginning, and now how the team is talking about legibility and other technical aspects, considering for generate reading materials, and how they can integrate gender and equality considerations. So this is an important lesson that we need to construct a capacity, because not always is there, and if you want to generate quality resources that can be open and distributed, you need teams consolidated that can generate and maintain the generation and the process and the open resources development. Another thing is that the people involved need to not only understand what Creative Commons or open licensing means, but also that are different types of licensing, and you don't have to be limited to one, or you can think about your needs or the objective of the educational resource and use the license that it's more proper or facilitate the use and distribution. And this is also important because maybe sometimes people think that open licensing is like openness totally, and not always is the case, like in the case of a reference book or a guideline that the Ministry of Education want to have some authority and not necessarily make many adaptations to maintain the content. Well, and finally, also lessons and challenges. I think that one of the success of the open resources is their quality. They meet quality criteria. They are aligned with the curriculum. They incorporate technical criteria, and this made the resources desirable, and this made that other actors want to share them and are more open to open licensing. Another challenge is attribution. One thing we have faced is even that we have open licensing, we use some attribution and credit the author, and the Ministry of Education and the authors have this concern about how their work are going to be, we will be giving credits for them. So we need to make more conscious on attributions, even in open licensing. And final challenge is open educational resources dissemination. Actually, this is a actual challenge we have. We are in the midst of government transition that began with this sanitary emergency, and we have a lot of resources and different formats and different ways to make them accessible to teachers and learners and students, but we have the challenge to disseminate how we can really can give them to other institutions, how we can make them more available and more people know about it and can use it and learn from them too. So I hope this experience also enrich the previous presentations and allows us to discuss about the similar challenges and what we can learn from each other in order to use open resources to equality education. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria Jose. I've launched one more poll around some challenges and opportunities related to open licensing. I think we have a couple questions in the Q&A to address, so please keep adding more. And I just wanted to, I want to give plenty of time. I think we have about 20 more minutes to cover the additional questions and comments from the audience. If you can type your question into the chat, or if you'd prefer, we could also unmute you. That's a possibility. But for the panelists, just generally, all of the presentations I think covered some really interesting and innovative approaches to how open licensing can be used to support creation and dissemination of content. What I think maybe just as a basic starting point is, and I know our projects have grappled with, and many others as well, is the sort of basic decision tree of, are you creating new content? Is the new content going to be created with public resources? Or are you trying to pull existing content into greater production? So I'm curious if any of you have seen or would support the Creative Commons licensing selection on the Creative Commons website page is pretty clear about which license to pick and why. But I think we could use a more basic decision tree around what the market looks like. Are there market failures? Is it lack of, are the high costs of the available books in certain languages? Is it a market failure? Is it low demand? Are there tariffs and issues related to local printing? In other words, we have a lot of barriers, and I think the creative responses that Rebecca and Kyle in particular responded to for bringing existing content producers into opportunity to still generate revenue from the printing of titles locally. In other words, sort of a hybrid model, that not just pure open license, but being able to also print for revenue was really interesting. And I think all of us could use better support in being able to analyze our local markets that we're supporting in the project, and be able to make the right decision in terms of how to proceed with licensing support. So I've launched that poll. I'm not sure, Rebecca, Kyle, Simon, if you want to put your video back on, come back in and answer that and other questions, particularly from the audience. I can also help support some Q&A. We've only got a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I'm not sure if everybody's still working on having their coffee this morning and wants to increase that consumption to add some more to the discussion there. But maybe for Rebecca, Kyle, others, how do you see, how do you make these decisions around which license given the market that you're working in, and what types of information do you need to be able to make that right decision to, because we're frequently asked, it's in the contract, all the materials need to be open licensed. What that means, right? Is it new? Was it already there? How do we convince them if it was already there to maybe make it open, particularly if it was developed previously with public resources? Can you give us some advice, and can we get a decision tree from you all to help inform all of our work going forward?
Kyle, do you want to start?
Sure. Sure. Let's make a decision tree. That sounds great. I think it really depends on the context of each market. Like you said, we've worked in countries that have basically no publishing industry whatsoever, and in those contexts, it's really going to be print houses that you start with, somebody who has capabilities in printing. And in those cases, you really need the CC-BY, just the completely open license, to be able to hand them these design files. I think Simon mentioned that in the very opening, this kind of repository of InDesign files that have that CC-BY license that we can just give to those kind of print house style publishers and allow them to be able to print those and get those to market and at least start to slowly create that publishing sector to support that entire ecosystem approach. A lot of times when we're looking at a country, if there are established publishers, we really want to be able to support them in whatever way we can. Part of that is the licensing on how we license it so they can print and sell those books, but then also a lot of it is just the professional development of outreach. How can we help them do more to stimulate a demand? That's not an easy answer as well, because you can't just stimulate demand from one side. But it's also working with them for our professional development within the publishers to network with the writers and the authors. So I definitely think there's no easy answer to it, but it's chipping away little piece, one piece at a time.
Maybe just to complement that, I think probably the largest challenge we have seen is around the actual textbooks themselves, not around supplemental reading materials, but when textbooks, because that's the bread and butter of many publishers, and they're concerned to look at that in any variation, right, without getting paid for it. So a lot of that has to do with looking at the duration of the license and the what's built into the license for use. I would just say in decision tree, I think it's really a lot to look at quality. Does it meet the basic needs of what we hope a reader to needs at that particular age? Is the quality there? Is it interesting and engaging? Does it have all the learning that it needs, but also are there enough books that have the fun that is also, I mean, you can teach someone to read, right? You can have a lot of leveled and decodable books, but if there aren't enough storybooks to make it interesting and alive, you need that nice blend. I think one thing that we have found from the digital that we've been able to inform publishers that have said, okay, we'll put these number of titles available on your digital platform, is when they saw the amount that it had been read, they decided to then print because they realized there was a market to actually sell that book in print form. And I think that is also kind of the reverse for those that are starting in print, to look at digital as a way to build their market and see what books actually resonate, because they don't know. Once the books often are distributed, there's very little feedback to the publisher themselves on how it's resonating within the readership.
Yeah, and to add to that, what Rebecca just said, we found that in some cases, in some countries, that having the digital version on the digital library has actually helped publishers increase sales. It increases exposure of them as a publisher and the book. So they've actually seen increased sales of the print copies because of the availability of those digital versions with the open licenses as well. And also to Judith's second question in the question section, I think it is really challenging, and I completely agree with Judith's comment there. It's not as if there's these sustainable income streams just out there waiting to be tapped into. It definitely takes a lot of work. And just quickly, 3 examples that we're doing on that side is part of it is just challenging mindsets, working with publishers in different countries. Some of the publishers we work with, they've never even thought about including writers and illustrators into those agreements. And paying them on a per book basis or whatever, including them in the profits that they get from selling books. So the first part is even just challenging those mindsets to include the creators in that process. Another piece of that is the exposure. A lot of the illustrators that we work with also are freelance illustrators. And so when they work on a book, we try to give them as much exposure through social media, we have our own collaborators page. We try to get their work and name out there as well. So even if they can't necessarily have right now a sustainable income stream from children's storybooks, at least we can help them have a sustainable income stream that is still in the creative process, in the creative sector. And then the last piece, we also have the reading program side. We have reading ambassadors who we help train, and they go into their own communities and promote reading and read with children and families. And part of that training is just to, when they introduce a book and when they read the title of the book, also including the author and the illustrator in that. And that's really important just to get that message across to children and families. Like, this was written by somebody. This was written by somebody in your local community. And so just having that little bit of exposure increases the value that people hold for children's storybooks. But it is a slow process, and it's one that we've seen progress on, but it will definitely take a lot of work.
Just a clarification question maybe for Maria Jose as well. When you were talking about your resources, those were all newly produced with funding from the project, right? I guess I want to make sure that we really are distinguishing newly developed materials with public resources and funding versus drawing from the market and existing publications.
Yes, they are newly resources. And what we take in account for the licensing is, as I was saying before, the use that we want for the resources. So if you want to the teacher only consult as a reference book or a textbook or a guide, so you may want a different type of licensing from, for example, reading materials that you want the teachers reuse, adapt, translate into their own languages, and you can figure out what license is better for the use and implementation you want. And in this case, the use and implementation, the Ministry of Education wants for the resources.
Okay, and there's a question in the chat about handling, how do you handle open licensing for textbooks that contain purchased photographs that have a one-time use license? If anyone can answer that one.
I don't have a specific answer. I just have to say that it really looking at really talking with publishers to understand whether they have the legal rights for everything in that book is often quite insightful to recognize that they don't. They may have rights for some of the content, but like you said, they may not have it for the photographs or some of the tables, and really working through that up front with them, or when you're creating, to make sure that all of that is checked, because otherwise it makes it very complicated to share the whole resource. Maybe I'll just ask to just answer a little bit on the privacy. Totally critical question. I'm glad, thank you for bringing it up. All of Worldreader's platforms are GDP compliant, so we do not actually track, we don't know which child from a mobile phone perspective is actually reading. And then in schools, it's based on the Ministry of Education engagement, but many times they're actually sharing a device, so we're getting a collective view of what the reading is. We can also do individual view, but all that information would be anonymized according to GDPR regulations.
And that's the same for the Let's Read digital library as well. We can see it from a high-level view of how many users there are and how many books have been read, but we're not actually tracking, so we can actually connect it to any individual.
Great. Simon, did you want to take a look at that bigger question from Judith, the first one? I'll post it for you to answer live.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is, I mean, as Carl said, there's no easy answer to this. Very hard to get sustainable income, as Judith said. In terms of the large procurements, I mean, obviously it's either the donors who are buying the books or the ministries for the bigger sales. From a donor point of view, the way forward is through the funding of upcoming projects. At the moment, the large donors are not funding directly to the smaller organizations, as far as I'm aware. The bigger ones are through RTI or EDC or whoever, who are implementing the larger projects. For MOE funding, I mean, that just varies so drastically. We were recently in Malawi, and the supplementary readers have been entirely funded by the donors for years. The MOE is not spending any money on that. Where they do have money, I mean, absolutely, USAID can open doors. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis. I mean, they definitely can improve the marketing, the networking opportunities. It does, a lot of it depend on the ministry policies. Some ministries have to approve all the materials that go into libraries. So that is a big issue. It again depends on different countries. I think a lot of it is also, as Kyle was saying, and it's like Neil Butcher and those guys have worked on, the different options, like the digital free, the pay for the physical books. That is going to have to be something that is done. I mean, the donors aren't going to be able to fund it forever, so that is necessary. And something that's happening now is there is COVID funding. There is increasingly money being available. It's not being sorted out yet, but organizations such as the World Bank are looking at getting money out to ministries. It's the funding mechanisms are still being developed, but that might be something that if they say they want a large quantity of reading materials out there rapidly, this may be an opportunity for existing materials in specific languages.
Thanks. There was another comment really from Judith about the ecosystem that seems to be beginning, and I am most excited about this. We sort of went from open is good 5 years ago, and it was written into a lot of requirements without necessarily, I think, a deep understanding of the implications of it, or even negotiating a lot of this work up front with ministries. So I think that there's been a lot of progress, and particularly the more flexible commercialization opportunities that Rebecca and Kyle are presenting, I think could be really interesting. So I look forward to some more work from the Global Book Alliance, Simon, on guiding us all toward negotiating these complicated and thorny issues. We have, maybe, Simon, can you give us a little update on what we can expect to see coming out of the Global Book Alliance going forward?
Sure. So we have conducted our first 2 supply chain assessments. So these were visits to Malawi and to Cambodia, meeting with all the various different stakeholders, the ministries, the private publishers and printers, the NGOs, etc. And so the first report is with USAID for Malawi, and then the second one for Cambodia is just being drafted. Once that'll happen, then we'll be going back to USAID Malawi and to the ministry to see their feedback on it. And from there will be training related to finding in the book supply, whatever the ministry and USAID Malawi and other donors find most appropriate. Likewise for Cambodia, we were due to be going to Zambia and to Jordan for the next ones. That was obviously delayed because of the COVID restrictions. So we're working on how that'll happen. We're working very much with the Global Digital Library on various different options, like the translator story, getting the print materials. One request to all implementing partners and others is, if you have materials that you can get onto the Global Digital Library, if we can get the InDesign files that then can be made available for printing through ministries or for NGOs, etc. On the GDL that's in EPUB, but they've also got a GitHub site for all the InDesign files. So please get in contact about that. And then there will be training on both the GDL and the supply chain in general. So those are the next steps that are coming up.
Great, thanks. I answered in the Q&A, but also want to do it live. The recording will be posted for these and I think most of the vCIES sessions on the website at some point. There's a small volunteer force of people trying to gather those links and post them, so please be patient. It may take a little while. There's one, I think, for maybe you, Kyle, on the reader side. Maybe it's not for you, maybe it's, but it's talking about regarding the reader side of the book ecosystem. It'd be great to hear more experience about how others are managing this, to do reading campaigns to reach directly to parents and communities and train around how to do this.
We do a little bit of that, like I mentioned before, in the number of the countries that we're working in. I'd be curious to hear, Rebecca, from you, what Worldreader, if you're working specifically with publishers on the outreach side of things, so not just to bring their books to the Worldreader ecosystem and platform, but do you do outreach to help publishers reach directly to families and communities?
We do. I mean, one, we've trained them on how to outreach. We've actually been working with publishers on to kind of be their powered by Worldreader platform for them to actually do and us push out some of their material under their name as a service to them. And then in terms of actual trying to reach that reader or the parent in the community, we've done quite a bit around digital marketing campaigns. On our website, we have reports around the work we've done in India, the most recent work we've done in Jordan to promote reading and the value of reading for parents, using both external media, be it WhatsApp, Facebook, etc., as well as in-app push notifications to do that reminder, some critical messaging activities, etc. And we've seen that it's had quite a bit of success. We begin to also track, like, at what pace, you can run a lot of tests, right? At what pace do you bring a reader back in? Is it after 2 days that you remind them, or after 4 days, etc.? So we do a lot of that testing behind the scenes. But yes, we will be soon launching a reading challenge within our COVID-19 response, and believe that it's a vehicle that we'll continue to develop and support other partners with as they have their messaging that they want to get out. Can we do it as radio messages go forward? Can we then reinforce from a digital perspective, as well as any type of community-based work? So we see it as a service we can provide to others, particularly around their messaging and helping them with that digital marketing approach.
Thanks. I posted the poll results so that you can all see that. I think we have lots of challenges and opportunities ahead of us. Maybe Simon, suppose I just finished creating a open resource. I've Creative Commons licensed it and it was under a USA contractual deliverable. What do I do with it? Just as a reminder, as we're all spending time cleaning out our files, our closets, our files. And you're on mute if you're. I'm unmuting you, Simon.
Hi. Yes, so the materials can be directly uploaded to the GDL. Go on there, there's instructions about doing it. It needs to be in EPUB, but that's very, very straightforward to translate it from InDesign into EPUB. And then for the InDesign files, those are going on to GitHub. So for those, you can reach out to us at the GBA at Gabaya, and we will coordinate. We have a woman, Tracy Cordner, who is working very closely with Krista and his team in Norway, and we can get those up there. So this is a big push from USAID, so we really do appreciate you getting that to us.
That's great. And the contact information for that, we go to the Global Book Alliance in Action website, or?
Yes, Global Book Alliance in Action website there's the contact there. It will come to the right people.
Super. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I know we're a little bit past time. Simon, any closing remarks?
No, thank you very much. Please do reach out to us at My email address is sjames@edc.org. Amber is agove@rti.org. Reach out to either of us, and we will forward any questions for the rest of our teams. We would like to thank Kyle, Rebecca, and Maria Jose, as well as Amber, for a great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for
Thanks, everyone.
participating.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.